Hello and welcome back to Raging Loop one last time. We have our fifth and last extra story here. Sheep versus Stack of Reports. Apparently a documentary on the life of the sheep, apparently. I don't know what it's going to be about. It says, one's dream is another's reality. An entity viewing everything from outside the story aims to recap the incident from another viewpoint and tie up loose ends. Alright, well, I mean, I guess we're gonna go for it. Also, was this return button always like at the edge of the screen to the top? I just noticed that before starting recording and I was like, that doesn't look right. It looks like there should be like a little bit of space up there, but you know, whatever. We'll go in. Report. Writer Mitsuji Misamine. Date 28th of August 2003. Summary. I somehow resolved it. The end. God damn it. Also, no, I think I have to wait. Can I? Let me check one more time if I can turn that off somehow. Because I don't think I can. Because I think it's already muted, so I think that's just a bug in the game. And it's kind of really annoying, but yeah, I don't think we have a choice. So we're gonna listen to the voice. Rhyme not intended. Can you just tell by looking? I ain't suited to writing this crap. Yeah, I know. Reporting on Jinx-like activities and joint suppression, was it? It's necessary, I get that. Still, it don't change that this ain't really my thing. Man, I wish a meteor would fall on my head. I gotta take care of this to get used to it. I need to be used to it so I can take care of this. It's such a pain. No, that's part of it, but I just really hate reading and writing shit. Sorry. You're right. I'll keep that in mind. Wait, no, I'd feel bad. After her blindingly white superior left, Mitsuji Misamine let out a deliberately loud sigh. White because she's a sheep. She'd expected grumbling would make a difference in an organization like this, but it appeared to have no effect. In actuality, as a member of their active force, she had plenty of experience with recon and reports. It wasn't her lack of literary talent or her ex-boyfriend, Haruaki Vazashi, or whatever his real name was, that was the problem. It was figuring out how to write the report while keeping her power hidden. Mitsuji Misamine was the sheep. Or rather, Mitsuji Misamine was a name she'd simply given to herself as a play on Hitsuji, or sheep. In reality, her true name was simply Sheep. As the name indicated, she'd lived in a very peculiar environment until recently. So, what I want to know is if Haruaki dated her while she was a sheep, or after that. Though her current environment was pretty peculiar on its own. After all, normal people were completely unaware of the church. But the sheep's existence was heretical, even to them. So she needed to hide her true nature even within the already concealed church. They had unnatural powers. Here, unnatural powers refer to things that would be generally considered superpowers or magic. Supernatural powers right out of the realm of fiction. Those powers, thought only to exist in fantasy, did in fact actually exist, in a sense anyway. These superpowers assumed to exist in a certain sense were known by many different names. From the perspective of the church, they were called jinxes. The church claimed that jinxes were superpowers born of beings isolated from human socialization. It was hard to understand when written like this, so the church often explained using a cult and a Rain Man as an example. There was a man who seemingly brought rain to any event he participated in. This left an impression on that group, who began treating him as a genuine rainbringer. A cult showcased superpowers within itself. Until the cult was exposed from the outside, these superpowers were treated as the real deal. Even if they were rules that defied common sense and accepted science, there were cases where those separated from human relations could adopt those rules. Therefore, jinxes were those superpowers that existed via this agreement to abandon common sense, also known as a contract. This didn't mean that jinxes were a mere game of make-believe. Rather, jinxes were a definitive phenomenon and threat to the ones who'd executed a contract. But as a result of their nature, jinxes could not be scientifically proven nor debunked. In the first place, it was inherent to jinxes that people who want to prove them themselves got repelled from human relations at the very earliest stage. That was why the church advocated for separating the events of the world of jinxes from normal society, resolving them and covering them up. This mindset was incompatible with the congregation, who called for harmony between jinxes and normal humans, and the parliament, who wished to rule peacefully using jinxes. That was why the academia, whose goal was to study what jinxes were and discuss them, were the dominant faction. There were many passing, pre-existing religious fundamentalist and destructive ideology groups that opposed the four. Jinx society was spread all across the globe, their numbers said to be in the tens if not hundreds of thousands. And naturally, due to their nature of being isolated relationships, there were millions out there that remained undiscovered by Jinx society. This world did not adhere to common sense as well as people thought it did, an opinion shared by those who knew about jinxes. Jinxes could include any unusual abilities as long as those who know about them acknowledged them. From magical abilities and out of storybooks, like breathing fire and shooting lightning, to showing illusions and altering reality, the possibilities were limitless. Generally, it was believed that the less a person adhered to common sense, the more absurd jinxes they could acknowledge, or be acknowledged by. Therefore, there was a trend of describing jinxes with the simple phrase, superpowers born from twisted personalities. When put that way, Mitsuji believed that as long as others were as twisted as her, it wasn't strange for them to have those powers. It wasn't just her, it was them. Most of them had been forced to scatter, and she was sure the majority of them had been killed. She had been lucky, that or clever, for she had managed to survive not by fighting, but by choosing to flee. Thus, she needed to keep giving her all, so she could survive, so she could prolong her future. The moment she reached out to her keyboard, she felt a pair of hands from behind gently overlap her own. She thought her heart was going to stop. She hadn't felt that presence at all. White hands, long white sleeves. The superior of ambiguous age she had just been speaking with. The woman's fingers moved, making Mitsuji type the following words like a puppet master. Summary. I, Mitsuji Misamine, a survivor of the Salvation Spaceship Project, prevented a disaster of biblical proportions.
心配しないで。
A stifled voice caressed her neck.
気づいているのは多分私だけ。あるいは私のようにことを大きくするつもりのない子たちだけ。もちろんこんなものは提出しない。大丈夫。ただし私には全てを話してちょうだい。
When did you realize it? And don't give me that protection crap. The church you belong to was the group who allowed the academia to carry out their culling. What definition of shelter or concealment do you even have?
あなたを守るだけで精一杯だった。それだけ家畜のインパクトは大きいのよ。組織だっては守れないほどにね。
Yeah, that figures. But can't you see that's even more of a reason why I can't trust you guys?
ええ、信用はしない方がいいわ。私だってあなたのことが大っぴらになるようなことになればかばいはしないから。さも知らなかったかのように羊を見つけたと言って追い立てる側に回るでしょうね。
Well, that's very nice and reassuring to hear.
まあ、ショックのあまり手が滑るとか何かを見落とすとかはするかもしれないけど。
Sure you should be saying all of this?
上の監視手段は眠らせてきた。ここは安全よ。
What even are you?
教会もそれなりに含まれんよ。そこで生き延びるためにはいろいろ知っておかないと。
Why are you going so far? Got a reason?
家畜の能力の有用性、10年後を見越したパワーバランスの計画、あとはあなたに個人的に興味がある不足。
Sure as hell ain't. There wouldn't be a need for massacres if those were the reasons.
あなたは政治が分かってない。核兵器は加戦するから意味があるの。
Now she understood. The cattle who knew only great misfortune and therefore possessed extremely powerful jinxes easily numbered over 100, including the actual candidates. If they had been carelessly scattered, there was a risk of an all-out war. But there was also a chance that their threat level would fade if they grew obsolete. They could function as a threat precisely because there were so few survivors. As such, they had been culled until there were a select few left alive. I feel sick.
繰り返すけど、そこまでしないと、あなたをここまで連れてくることもできなかった。世界の救済を執行する、逸脱者を作り出そうとする試み、その成功例の一つであるあなたは、コンセプト上は、単独で世界を滅ぼすこともできるだけの力を秘めている。その危険性を理解しているなら、あなただって理解できるはずよ。仲間の屍の上に生きる覚悟が必要なことくらいは。
Mitsuji knew everything she was telling her was true. A kind, considerate sheep that was like a sister to her fellow cattle. She, who was once considered such by the pasture, could no longer retain such a convenient position anymore. She knew that. It was just hard to accept, that was all. So she said it again. I feel sick. The origin of the Fujiyoshi incident was a fairly standard story. It's the normal kind of activity you see in any group. You look for isolated relationships and investigate whether there's an unknown jinx involved. Unfortunately, most of the time there is. In your preliminary investigation, you detected traces of reality alteration, and so you sent me, someone with a similar type of power.
そうね。教会はあなたのことを限定的な現実改変能力者だと考えていたから。
She talked like she didn't have one herself. Mitsuji wanted to ask her where they'd found a lead on her, but decided to save that for later. Yeah, that was the pretext you gave me, but in actuality you covered her real power too.
植松里香子。彼女への尋問の記録には全部目を通したわ。安息の地を地獄めいた夢に求めた土雲2000数百年の怨念。まさかそんなに大きな話だとはね。
I just can't see her being safer than the cattle.
仕方ないでしょ。今の彼女からは証言されるような強さの魔性が検出されなかったんだから。
They referred to warped humanity that could form the basis of a jinx as a diabolicity?
今の彼女はちょっとばかりひねくれたクールな知女ってとこかしら。その程度で教会は命を取らないわよ。
Well, anyway, For good or for ill, we were compatible. I could exploit a gap in her reality alteration to intervene with my ability.
何をしたの？
The moment reality became a dream, I accessed my and that idiot's memories and shoved them into my and that idiot's heads. Oh, and the reason he kept his memories? It was because they were linked to his soul or something like that, I guess? Well, it's merely a constellation of mind.
なるほど。彼が事件解決に主要な役割を果たす手助けをしたのね。ちなみに、彼が居合わせたのは本当に偶然なのね。
Yeah, if it weren't, I would have quit this job even if it involved killing myself.
本当かしら。なんだかんだで、あなたは見捨てられないタイプに見えるけど。とにかく、たまたまあなたが夢使いで、たまたま彼と現地で再会したから、うまく事件解決ができたってわけね。
Mitsuji lazily nodded. The concept of the sheep in the cattle was to bring salvation through dreams. The concept itself wasn't all that new. If they could show all of mankind a blissful dream, they could attain salvation in their minds. Mankind's interests contained complicated self-contradictions. Achieving universal bliss by optimizing everyone's interests was difficult. So there were two easy methods conceived. Either alter people's values and standardize them, or separate them and satisfy them individually. The former was a common idea that had been attempted to be achieved throughout human history via religion, culture, and morals. The latter was an idea that had shown up in sci-fi and such over the past few decades as the development of computer networks progressed. Mitsuji's power was the epitome of the latter. If they could show every human in the world their own blissful dream, all of mankind would attain bliss. Basically, she could use a power that showed others in a very wide range a specific dream. She could make dreams of all types, and could read others' thoughts and memories through the dream, albeit in an incomplete fashion. That skill and subtlety was her true strength. However, there was another method of using dreams. When dreaming, a dreamer is under the illusion that everything happening is real. No matter how crazy things got inside, it was possible not to realize it was a dream, and as long as they didn't, the dream was endlessly real to its observer. However, there were also Jinx users who could do unrealistic things that could make the observer want to believe it was a dream. Thus, it was possible to alter reality through dreams. The observer could take the reality they didn't want to believe and swap it for one they did. Dream writing, a reality alteration restoration phenomenon that used denial of supernatural phenomena. It was different from standard reality alteration in that the dream wielder could prepare any reality they desired by merely attaining approval. For example, the reason Mitsuji had been able to prepare the convenience store and all the items Haruaki had requested was because those were small-scale reality alterations via dreams. She had told the church that her Jinx was nothing more than that, an ability that let her create a base and supplies. It was a handy power to possess, but it did have its limits. She couldn't produce unlimited food to ration off forever, and though she could produce lifeboats, it would be difficult to produce a nuclear weapon. Basically, she couldn't attain agreement between the customer and herself to produce anything that definitely couldn't exist in the storage room. Because of this, reality alteration on a small scale was far from perfect, and all sorts of roadblocks had come up regarding implementation. To say nothing of long-range reality alteration. Creating a single dream that everyone affected could agree upon was next to impossible. In the end, it was a case filled with many self-contradictions to the point of nigh impossible as a way to make everyone happy. Therefore, to Jinx users, long-range reality alteration was considered to be, ironically enough, unrealistic. Or so it should have been. But this time was different. Rikaku Uematsu was a Jinx user who specialized in altering reality via dreams. For example, her spiritual healing was essentially the power to bring her real self closer to her idealized self in the dream. If you ask me, using the roundabout image of a spider or something to bring that out was wasteful. But her true fearsome power was to erase that wastefulness without hardship.
真に恐れるべき能力
Yeah, that spider's astonishing perception and calculation. A DD given constant justification by folding in 1,000 years worth of countless ancestors' grudges. It's basically a powerful neurological computer. By running the dream manipulation power in parallel to it, the data processing ability of the former bearer of the spiders would be beyond imagination. Of course, it's still difficult to devise an ideal dream through pure calculations, so she came up with a different method.
それが巻き戻りだったの
Yeah. By completely recording the state of a fixed area and fixed observers at a certain moment in time, like tearing it out of reality.
カメラみたいに
Yes, but it's not just images. It's an extraordinary power that records everything happening in that wall at that moment. The spider could pull that off and create extremely detailed dreams of the past. So long as it's a past they've experienced, anyone can accept it. In other words, a state where everything you worked hard on all day was just a dream.
漫画とかでいう夢落ちを強制的に発生させる
Yeah, you can think of it like that.
それは理解できたわつまり
But like I said, even that's one hell of a story.
彼女をもってしても土雲の復活に足りるだけの糧ややあれを都合よく全部回収したぞってな夢を作ることはできなかっただからあの集落でたまたま文化的に継続していた殺人慣習を利用して自分以外の住人の全滅を狙ったでも彼女はそのために世界すべてを巻き戻してたわけじゃないんでしょ
Exactly. She would have needed a much larger camera for that, and that would be unrealistic.
そうよねあなたの理屈だと
The infinite loop Haruaki and I were put through actually occurred in the spider's dream. It was basically a simulation. She let all the characters roam freely from the initial save point. And if the initial failure conditions were met, she retried the dream from the start.
そして最終的にいい結果が出た時だけその夢を現実と差し替える
Right, so even when we were going through that hell of a loop, not a single second passed in reality. This was also due to the spider's incredible calculation ability. It really is fortunate that it failed.
まったくね
Another bit of cleverness on Rikaku Uematsu's part was setting her own death as the trigger for setting off the alteration. Since she herself had to be immersed in the dream, there's no question that was the best way to go about it.
ああ彼女は確か証言してたわね土雲の現世の復活には地獄の入り口だというサラナ川や霧のシチュエーションが必須だったって
Yeah, when you consider the circumstances that brought about the jinx and what it wanted to achieve, it's no wonder she needed to go through such a troubling procedure. But it meant she couldn't just watch over the dream from a safe place. She needed to stand on alert in the killing grounds. It seemed she could have set active resets she could use whenever it looked like she was going to fail, but that would make her unable to counter deadly surprise attacks. In that case, there would have been an off chance that the dream where she died would feed back into reality. And even if she could return to reality, there was no telling how long she would have to wait in the real world until she could restart the dream. Exactly how many times did she loop again?
本人の証言が正しければ17万6201回らしいわよ
Even if it only took her a second to reset in the real world, repeating that many loops would mean it would have taken place over 2 whole days, more or less.
彼女儀式発動には丸1日かかったとも証言してたわね
You're kidding me? If it took that long each time, 400 years would have passed in the real world. That's impossible. So the Tsuchigumo of dreams, who existed partially independently, automatically looped once it detected its life had ended.
それで復活に必要な手続きをするために夢を出る必要はなくなりほぼその上、
Yeah.
自分の死という絶対失敗条件が発生した後は迅速にやり直しが発生する 無駄のないスキームが完成した。
Exactly.
賢いわね。
No, it may have been a clever setup. She made a foolish mistake. She ignored those who started taking irregular actions right after the looping began.
芹沢千恵美とあなたの元彼のことね。
Don't say that too much. Anyway, those two weren't originally supposed to be there. Memories were kept outside of the reality alteration by the spider, and no one except for itself was supposed to retain those memories. Yet not only did it not view them with suspicion, but it also invited them, so they could bring about the desired result. That's not the way a dream wheeler fights. The dream wheeler dominates precisely because they have complete control over the dream. It's the role of a demon lord. The spider should have driven Haruaki and Chiemi out of the dream or killed them at the starting point each time. It should have also striven to bring about the best result through its own efforts. But instead she wished for a knight in shining armor. She messed with the starting point just to change the characters in the story. As a result, Haruaki was drawn in and it all went to waste. If it weren't for that foolishness, we probably would have lost.
あなたがそこまで言うならよほどだったのね。
You get it? This was a vengeful creature over 2,000 years old. It's on a whole different league from us fledglings from the Salvation Pasture. And even though it didn't know a thing about jinxes, it came from a bloodline that refined its ability to monstrous efficiency. I'm sure that jinxes on this level are rare, but still, I'm saying this one was no joke. How many incidents as big as this are gonna happen in this country in the future?
まあ、私自身はそういうのは3回くらいかな。不幸な人はいるし、そのうちの何割かは危険な力を持って社会に復讐しようとするわけよ。珍しいことじゃないわ。教会で働いてると、そういうのからは逃げられないからね。あなたにも今後、せいぜい助けてもらおうと思うわ。
Nope, not happening. I'll be devoting myself to courier jobs and logistical support, thank you.
ま、表向きはそうした方がいいわね。ただ、あなたのポテンシャルを私は正確に知っておきたい。あなた、解決の直前に相当危ない瞬間があったみたいなこと言ってたわよね。何があったの？教えて。
Mitsuji hesitated. It would be like revealing an ace up her sleeve. Could she really trust this woman?
疑ってるって顔ね。いいわ。もし話してくれるなら、私も自分の能力をあなたに詳しく明かすから。
That'd be nice. Is it the secret to looking as young as you do at whatever age you are? I'd like that.
失礼な子ね。まあ、化粧のテクは応用が効くから、別途教えてもいいけど。あなた、素材は可愛いし。
Normally, Mitsuji had no interest in her femininity. If pressed, she'd say she wished she'd been born a guy and her sexual orientation leaned that way to some degree. It was for that reason that her Jinx avatar, the sheep, sounded like a guy. Fine, I'll tell you. Worst case, I'll punish you with a nightmare until you die.
そりゃ、ご勘弁願いたいわね。せいぜい漏らさないように注意する。
It was at this point Mitsuji successfully set a secret trap to seal her superior in a dream if she went against her word. What was so terrifying about the sheep was it could do that. I treaded on thin ice twice. The first was when that idiot screwed up. The second was when that idiot intentionally screwed up.
ふむふむ。
Well, put simply, I forced myself into the resurrected spider's head and stole a glance at a snapshot of the starting point. Uematsu had already fulfilled her goal, so she didn't need to press the reset button again. It was only at those times that I did a reality alteration.
雲の記憶したその瞬間をあなたが夢として練り上げ、それを現実と差し替えたのね。
Yeah, more accurately, I returned both the spider and that idiot's memories to the start, because he needed those memories. to make him agree easily without having him notice the unnatural moment of the swap. She had literally killed Haruaki. Not that she needed to say that, nor did she feel bad about it.
聞く限りでは相当の大技のようだけど、よく上松里香子に気づかれなかったわね。
Well, a dream wielder is, in a manner of speaking, in a constant state of delusion. I figured she'd let a little deja vu slide. I thought she'd chalk off that scene of her finally achieving her desire to resurrect the Tsuchigumo as just a dream.
それで一旦は納得したと。
But the last time pushed it too far. The memory the spider had almost forgotten of its first success mixed in with me and Haruaki's memories and was recycled. As a result, I ended up creating a dream that went back further in real time. The spider could clearly notice the abnormality of that.
気づかれたと。
Yeah, she probably had no idea that someone with a similar power was operating in secret so close to her, but once she realized it, it all clicked. After all, my opponent had super senses and super intelligence that would bring military satellites to shame. I may be the sheep, but there's only so much I can do on my own. Still, I endured for 2 days. After that, my avatar was defeated and I was down for the count.
それだけど、あなたは能力行使に際してアバターを必要とするのよね。他の家畜もそうなの？
Yeah, there are tons like that. After all, they motivated us with the concepts of a pasture and cattle ever since we were kids. Images of model animals are clear, and it's best to link them deeply with your own imagination, the way it naturally takes shape.
となると S 型または G 型。獣のモデルにするならまあ妥当かしら。
Sounds like the sort of thing the academia would say.
これでもディアグノーザーの学会資格は持ってるから私。しかしアバターをやられてよく無事だったわね。それ以来能力に支障が残ったりしなかった？
The core of the diabolicities of our avatars or metaphors and metamorphs are designed to not get damaged by these power-based hazards.
なるほど。トカゲの尻尾か。本体の生存を最優先とし、脱出と再決起の瞬間を待つ。マジで世界を救う戦争なんて起こそうとしてたの？
I've got no clue what the pasture is thinking. After all, you guys or someone else already killed them. However, the terminal cattle and their candidates believed it. That they would save the world. That the salvation pasture would spread across the world.
ふむ。そっちの話も興味深いけど、まずは報告をどうするかね。
Yeah, good idea.
ふむ。わかった。こうしましょう。あなたは何もしなかった。
Huh?
状況的に植松里香子の中にも矛盾した気持ちがあったのは間違いない。だから、
Oops.
その
Every time.
植松里香子の前世みたいなものが、房石春明や芹沢千恵美を導いて、最終的に土雲を敗北させた。
Then what will it say about me?
基本すべてのループをコンビニ店員としてぼーっと過ごしたって感じかしら。
That's too cruel. I know we can't tell the truth, but at least give me a major role.
あらら要注意。人間が失敗する原因のベスト3に入るのが功名心よ。目立たないでいいのは幸運と思わなきゃ。
Alright.
にしても、あの二人もちょっと注意すべきね。
Yeah, I guess. Honestly, in all honesty, Mitsuji still had feelings for Haruaki. Her relationship with him had awakened, allowed her to exhibit a femininity she never knew she had. It annoyed and embarrassed her whenever she thought about it, and she never wanted to be in a situation like that again. But when she was with Haruaki, he'd allowed her to be all that. She dated him with feelings so fresh she'd felt like a completely different person. She couldn't deny that for her, who had been living a double life as a spy for the project at the time, their relationship had been very relaxing. Nor could she deny that the 2 years she'd spent talking to him were now part of her life. However, she also knew she wasn't the type to stay tied down. If they'd kept dating, Haruaki would have likely realized the truth about her and proceeded to interrogate her non-stop. For that was his nature. He would have certainly been led to the project and the jinxes as a result. And then he would have ruined himself, no doubt about it. His disposition was simply that twisted and antagonistic. Whenever he did an activity he considered scary or interesting, he would always give the person he was facing off against a bad time. It was a nasty, cursed fate, like that of a protagonist of a story. If she were just an ordinary woman, that would have been fine. Revealing the secrets of neighbors and internal company affairs didn't always lead to life-threatening danger. But in the extraordinary life that Mitsuji lived, he would have been erased before long by someone with conflicting interests. And loath as she was to admit it, she didn't want that. Well, the biggest reason she broke up with him was because the war between her desire to kill him and her desire to bask more in their relationship had finally come to a close. The black seed sesame pudding had been the trigger for that, and in the end, she couldn't reach a compromise with the part of her who'd curl up in his arms and cry. Might be too late for that, though.
彼はもう手遅れかもしれないわね。
Mitsuji was stunned, feeling like her mind had been read. The mug her superior handed over was full of tepid coffee. What are you talking about? Mitsuji had long since stopped acting polite for formality's sake around her superior, but she felt this was an appropriate sense of distance.
彼、超常現象に深入りしすぎたでしょ。あなたの正体も半ば知ったわけだし、契約は成立したと思うべきでしょう。今後彼はジンクス使いとして目覚めるかもしれない。
Or maybe he's already awakened.
え？
There's an archetype known as the detective, right?
あれは超強力な無実化特化能力者か、あるいはジンクス無効化の現実改変者を示すアーキタイプよ。
Yeah, I know. There are kind of people who turn jinx incidents into real incidents through extreme sophism. That's basically what happened with this one, wasn't it?
まあ、表向きはね。でも、あなたがこう証言しているんだから。
But due to various reasons, there'll be no records of it, right?
ありえなくもないかもね。ちょっと注目した方がいいのかも。ただ、私はむしろ芹沢千恵美の方が危ない気がする。あの子の神を殺す力、どう思う？
Doesn't that depend on her definition of a god?
そりゃそうだけど、ジンクス的に言えば、悪魔的な存在を無条件で知覚して殺せるとかなったら、かなりやばい。
Demon, huh? I don't think the god she spoke of was that sort of entity. From a jinx standpoint, humans who travel too far down the path of deviancy were called demons. It was a hypothetical concept of a person who'd lost practically all ability to form relationships with humans, to the point where they couldn't even perceive them anymore. However, there were plenty of deviants who alluded to the existence of demons, so they probably existed. It was just hard to prove. On the other hand, the god Haruaki had explained afterwards over the phone seemed to be a type of concept completely different from jinxes. It was more like an alien or a real ghost.
そっちは録音テープ聞いたから、だいたい理解はしてるつもりだけど、まあ確かにね。人間に知覚されることで活性化、電波、変異する知的存在。どっちかっていうと SF の世界の話みたい。
According to Haruaki's definition, Uematsu's Tsuchigumo was also apparently a type of god, but Chiyomi never noticed it, right? In Jinx terms, the Tsuchigumo can be explained with DD. It would be better to consider it something else entirely, though.
それは植松里香子が神内明神の信仰で隠蔽してたとも考えられるけど、悪魔と神は 別物の線が濃厚か。でも、もしそんな神が実在したとして、これまで世界のどこからも似たような分析が出てこなかったのはなぜかしら。富士吉村は特殊な環境だったけど、あそこにだけ神がいたっていうのも不自然な話に思えるわ。
Hey, you ever hear this story?
なになに？エッチな話？
No, of course not. That's not the kind of person you are, right?
いやー、私くらい逸脱しちゃうと、たまに意識してキャラ崩さないと、行動パターンが確一化されてやばいのよ。
Anyway, the story is about the people who carved laws into this world.
何それ？牧場限定の話？
Might be, I guess. It is a Jinx-related story after all. Humans become demons when they deviate too far. Those demons can only be seen by their contractors. But those who boast about forming contracts with demons possess incredible Jinx powers.
そういう話もあるわね。
Isn't it strange? You should need mutual understanding and a contract in order to use your Jinx powers. If you could get that kind of power from an invisible source, wouldn't that completely turn that assumption on its head?
一応、ジンクス理論はあくまで他の理論と同様、仮説に過ぎないわ。そもそも、ジンクス的能力のすべてが単一の理論で定義できるかも相当怪しい状況なんだから。
This story tells the opposite. It says that demons don't break off from the world, they almost assimilate with it instead. Jinxes are the power to warp common sense. That's why they're linked to madmen and why they are barred from normal society from the start. But if an invisible entity, not some lunatic, used the power, it would be really hard to recognize it as a lie or a trick. Demons are already being accepted by the world, which makes them harder to see as a result. If we go with this line of thinking, then what happens to a demon that's reached the extreme?
世界に法則を刻むって、もしかして。
Yep, that Jinx is incorporated into the laws of the world, and no one finds it strange anymore. Incidentally, I was taught that such a demon becomes a law. For example, when the man called Newton became a law, this world became ruled by Newtonian physics. Stories like that.
おお、大胆すぎる説ね。過分にして聞いたことがなかったわ。それだと、太古の自然科学者や思想家が何らかの法をもたらしたから、現在の世界の秩序があるってことかしら。
Exactly. And that's not all. Perhaps the being known as Adam became a law and gave birth to zoogamy? Zoogamy? I have no idea what that is.
まさに魔法みたいな話ね。
Yeah, that's why we need to bring about the law known as joy to this world.
なるほど。テロリストに与えるにはもってこいの壮大で理想じみてて一発逆転主義な筋書きだわ。で、それが今までの話と何の関係があるっていうの？
Right. The situation's different, of course. I just don't have a good feeling about this. Because that idiot Haruaki gave the god Chiemi had vaguely perceived a clear definition this time.
待って。嫌な予感が私もしてきた。
If the laws of the world can be changed after the fact, whether by a demon or something else, then maybe Haruaki's definition of God will take a turn for the worse, and we'll start seeing those sorts of gods pop up everywhere.
いやいやいや、さすがに飛躍しすぎだから。
True, Haruaki might be a little different from a detective. He doesn't deny the existence of the unfathomable after all. Rather, he has the power to make the unfathomable real by coming up with explanations for them that are compatible with the real world.
笑えない。
Sure as hell ain't. Still, I wonder. It's still a bother in its own right, but maybe it won't even intersect all too much with our world.
そうかしら。ジンクス使いはね、無意味なすれ違いをあまりしないものよ。
Which is why you think we'll definitely see each other again?
そうよ。だって私たちは強くなるために自分で世界を狭くすることしかできないもの。 現にあなたは破局した後、何の打ち合わせもしないままここで彼と再会し、それが事件解決につながっている。
Mitsuji didn't object. She herself had found it unnatural. It could only be explained by a Jinx-like interpretation of their relationship.
この先きっとことさら困難なタイミングで彼らと再会するのよ。助けになるか、さらにややこしくなるかはわからないけど。
Stop it. That kind of hypothesis holds no water.
そんなことはないわ。少なくとも私はあらゆる悪い想像をしておかなきゃならない立場にあるし。超科学理論を現実化するジンクスか。もしそんなアーキタイプがあるとすれば、どう名付けるべきかしら。
A magician.
言えてみようね。
Tired of talking, the pair both brought the cold coffee to their lips at the exact same time, like mirror images. It was instant. She'd also put sugar in without asking. Not that Mitsuji was complaining.
とりあえず今聞きたいのはこんなところかしら。あとはそっちでもまとめられるわよね。
Yeah, however,
何？
how do we explain how Rikaku Uematsu lost her entire jinx at the 11th hour? It's not impossible to lose a jinx, but at that timing and when the lights went out, it's contrived, plain and simple. All I can come up with is that someone intervened.
知ってるでしょ？藤吉村の他の住人は白だったってバスガイドに偽装したうちの子が言ってた。
Well, there were some deviants, right?
そうね。牧島春に鴨志田近持両名ともあの現場にもいたし、神に関する貴重なサンプルなのは疑いないわ。得体の知れない強力なジンクスらしいし、その神が働きかけて雲を消滅させたってのがいい線じゃない？
Well, that's the only conclusion I can come to. By the way, what's the church planning to do with them?
別に普通の注意すべき一般人と同じ扱いよ。人を差し向けて遠巻きに監視することになるんじゃないかな。
I wonder if those sorts of standard methods will work on that so-called god.
ずいぶん神を危険視してるのね。
Well, we did have a faith, you know. I want to show those labeled gods respect and caution. At the very least, the Salvation Pasture Project had incorporated concepts and values from Abrahamic religions. That was also the reason why all the cattle were born on December 25th, on paper anyway, to symbolize they were all messiahs in the making.
半神論的な神はいわゆるヤハウェやアッラーのような唯一神とは本質的に異なる概念とも聞くわよ。
That doesn't matter. What's important for us is to know who it is that created the world, provides tribulations, and holds the right to destroy. Do you know why it was that the project was formed?
終末論的テロリズムによって自分たちの理想郷を作るためと理解しているけど。
I can't completely deny that. But on the other hand, the ranchers in charge of the pasture probably seriously believed the end was near.
だから本気で救世を？
Yeah, they didn't know how the end would come, so they cultivated many cattle.
言っとくけど、そういう妄想で事件を起こすやつはジンクス社会の外にも中にも山ほどいるからね。
I know. Well, it wouldn't hurt if we were idiots who couldn't escape those cases. Also, you church guys or whatever should just protect the world. That's the duty of the wolf who attacked the pasture.
狼ね。
Feeling her companion's eyes boring right into her, Mitsuji sipped her coffee, leaned back in her office chair, and looked up at the ceiling. At the Salvation Pasture Project, wolf was a code that referred to two things. The first referred to a case where either the project was exposed, or an investigation or attack that could have a great impact on the progression of the project came from the authorities or the academia. When they said the wolf is coming, the cattle and those associated with the project were to quickly escape and go into hiding, or so they were supposed to. But in the end, that had backfired due to sleeper agents and defectors, and the project was totally destroyed. The DD, Designed Diabolicity production project, a complete first in history, may have created many with unprecedented powers, but it was lacking in intelligence. The other was a mere legend whispered only amongst the cattle, of a cattle who specialized in killing cattle. That, or it was a plan to deal with cattle capable of destroying the world, who had already been released into it. Whatever the case, it was a word that symbolized fear and hostility to the cattle. In other words, Fenrir, the world-killing wolf. However, according to all the Central Intelligence Mitsuji had come into contact with working as an intelligence officer for the project, no such thing existed. She would have had no way of finding such information if it only existed in the brains of a select few of the top brass, including the ranchers, but it didn't seem likely to her. That said, an aberrant like Mitsuji didn't think it was impossible for there to be an aberrant Jinx user like that. If there were such a user, she'd probably come across them eventually due to the bond linking Jinx users. And if she did, all she could do was fight to the best of her ability. When she thought that, an idea suddenly came to Mitsuji. It was a trifling idea, no, a memory. Hey, do you have the list of those who live in Fujiyoshi and those who were there at the time of the extrication?
そりゃ。っていうか、報告書にまとめるようで、まとめてメールしたじゃない。
Oh, you did? Hey, you're right.
いきなりどうしたの?
The recollection immediately became an unpleasant conviction. Someone's missing.
え?
Fujiyoshi currently has 11 residents. There was an old man there who died. 2 journalists came from the outside. Add Chiemi, who's visiting back from the city, and that's 14 people. Add that idiot Haruaki and you get 15. But according to him, the Feast of the Yomi Perch had 16 people in it at most.
まずい見落としね。リストから欠けてるのは誰?
Meiko. I don't know, but through my avatar, I saw a 4-year-old girl there.
子供? そんな住人いないわよ。
Then she came from the outside.
そんな子供が一人で一体どんな事情?
The woman's words trailed off for the same reason as Mitsuji. Hey, from your experience, does that thing where Jinx users conveniently cross paths due to their shared bond happen frequently?
ひどくよくあることね。
Was there a 4-year-old girl who escaped from the pasture?
あなたに伝えることには抵抗があるわ。
I'm a fugitive. I have no intention of going back at this point. Besides, you know that regrouping is the sheepdog's job, right? Mitsuji had already gone over what the project's plan was if the wolf came. To suspend it and flee. In those situations, everyone was supposed to scatter in different random directions. After all, if an escape route plan had existed, the fugitives would all be rounded up if that ever leaked. In preparation for the arrival of the wolf, a Jinx user was designed for the purpose of regathering the cattle. That was the sheepdog. The sheepdog was a cattle kept under a heavy veil of secrecy, and Mitsuji had never met them. But in the end they'd been caught and were now collaborating with the academia, so this meticulous plan had grown moot. Mitsuji couldn't blame the sheepdog. After all, she had also thought of selling her comrades to keep herself safe. However, even though she was now hiding right under the church's noses to stay hidden, she feared the sheepdog would find her one day. But that was another story.
絶対に言わない約束よ。破ったらあなた、顔がなくなるからね。
Very well. It was a contract. Mitsuji knew the superior was a considerably skilled Jinx user, thus she should assume the restrictions had already come into effect. It was like they had each other at gunpoint. Mitsuji gulped, smiled, and steeled herself once more.
脱出組の家畜は確認されているだけで34名。そのうち成功例が7名で、あなたもこれに含まれる。加えて、学会の襲撃のギリギリ前に若干名の子供が施設から連れ出されていると、わずかな証言から推測されている。
the pasture had predicted the attack, which meant that the children they'd put priority on setting free behind closed doors were kids with the potential to be ideals. Amongst all the kids impounded by the project, only those who showed signs of jinxes were called cattle. There were three types of cattle: successes, failures, and ideals. Due to the abnormal education the children raised in the Salvation pasture received. What? Oh, sometimes there are just sentences where I'm like, huh? Due to the abnormal education the children raised in the Salvation pasture received, there was a high chance of them displaying a DD and obtaining a jinx. But that didn't mean they'd always get the jinx they'd been aiming for. Those who obtained jinxes that followed their concepts, those that possessed the specs and ability to achieve worldwide salvation, were called successes. Those who developed jinxes that either went against their concepts or clearly didn't match up to the level their concepts had been aiming for were called failures. From what Mitsuji knew, there were about a dozen successes, including herself, while there were supposedly many times more failures. But even the failures had abilities that could prove useful for some project or other, so they were kept in the confines of the pasture's facility. Most of them were ignorant detainees who had supposedly seen the end of the project in the recent attack by the Academia. Mitsuji had heard that after that they were all executed alongside the children who hadn't shown signs of jinxes. This inhuman and unprecedented measure had become well known in their world and had sparked massive debate. But that was besides the point. Though they were called successes, that didn't necessarily mean they were successes for the overall project. For example, the concept of the sheep was to bring salvation through dreams, but it was clear that didn't necessarily mean perfect salvation. It was merely something like euthanasia. Eternally delaying the moment the physical world ended in a subjective world and immersing in a blissful dream was not true salvation. In fact, all of the current successes could only bring about dystopian salvation such as that. Salvation meant as stopgap measures gathered to prepare for the coming end of the world. The successes were stopgap measures with a high success rate but a low salvation rate. Conversely, the Salvation Pasture project had also been undertaking the creation of DD even more complicated and delicate, yet capable of attaining true salvation. Those were ideals. As they were wrapped up in as much secrecy as the sheepdog, Mitsuji barely knew a thing about them.
わからないわ。その子たちについては、計画自体のざるっぷりからは考えられないほど情報統制が効いている。しかしきっと恐ろしく重要な子供たち。他をすべて投げ打っても計画のために逃がしたかった子たちでしょうから。脱出組狩りが一段落したら、牧羊犬はその子たちを探すことになるでしょうね。
I see. So I just gotta lay low until then, huh? But if that kid was an ideal, did she get separated from the helper who fled with her? Was there even such a person? If they were treating her so carefully, her helper should have been plenty talented in their own right. Like a skilled failure cattle or something. Would someone like that really do something like leave a child in the middle of mountains like it were nothing? And more than anything, Mitsuji had a question. The girl she'd seen for just a moment in that grey dream that became reality didn't look the least bit like a powerful ideal. Special jinxes were linked to special diabolicities, so shouldn't ideals be kids who were clearly abnormal? That idyllic girl looked only like a failure at best. And sure enough, Mitsuji's superior was regarding her pensively, as if she had the other answer.
今から言うことは、私が独自ルートで知るに至った情報。今の段階で絶対に出回るはずのない情報。
Quit lording it over me. You're not gonna back out now, are you? Not when you've come so far.
4月に失敗例の家畜が一人、学会の拘束を振り切って逃走した。それはちょうど4歳くらいの子供だったらしいわ。名前は確か 黒ヤギ。
I've heard of it. A failure that grants salvation by returning one to the womb. I heard it had a fatal lack of capacity. But wait, weren't they all massacred? And you mean those guys were all bested by a child?
どうやら学会側ではデータ採集のため名簿をごまかして居残り組たちを囲ってたらしい。調べた後殺すつもりで。だけど、黒ヤギは想定以上に危険な存在だったみたいね。
However,
学会行為の研究者が数名、全身をバラバラにされて殺されてる。
you serious?
おそらくは本人に比してかなり強力なアバターを持ってる。その上、くそ、なぜ気づかなかったのかしら。生き残った連中の中には精神をやられジンクスを喪失した者もいたようよ。これってまさに。
That settles it, yeah? That Jinx was a concept based on the myth of a black goat of darkness from some mythology that devoured and rebirthed all in creation. That girl, who had been declared a failure due to her limited stomach capacity, probably possessed another perfect ability. In other words, that black goat was... The black goat devours diabolicities. She'd eaten the diabolicities of all those present when she'd escaped the academia. And after she'd slipped into Fujiyoshi, she'd gone on the run again and devoured Rikako Uematsu's diabolicity. Ah.
幸か不幸かわからないわね。羊と黒ヤギがニアミスしてたって事実は。
Yeah, you're right. What would Mitsuji have done if she'd recognized her as the black goat? Would she have abandoned her mission to the church and helping the people of Fujiyoshi to take her and flee? Or would she have presented her to the church for self-protection, offering cheap compassion along the way? That was a pointless supposition. I thought Jinx users didn't cross paths for no reason.
ええ、無意味じゃなかったのでしょうね。
Are you saying it was necessary for the black goat to escape?
さあわからない。運命論は私も嫌い。ただ、簡単に捕まってしまわなかったということは嫌な予感はしちゃうわね。
The black goat was still on the run, all while concealing an exceedingly powerful Jinx in her diabolicity. The problem was that it couldn't save the world. If she kept concealing it as she grew up, perhaps it would become a threat that could rival that of the imaginary wolf. No clue. Mitsuji didn't know. To a cattle and fugitive like her, she didn't know if a monstrous entity born into this world like that was a bad thing. Mitsuji Misamine, through her activities in the outside world and meeting with Haruaki Fuzashi, knew that the project was inhuman and abominable. They even called the innocent children they turned into monsters for the sake of the project cattle. That girl who'd been born with a heavy burden to bear and had been abandoned by her fellow cattle like Misamine and the sheepdog was unmistakably miserable. Didn't she have the right to take revenge on the world? And wouldn't Mitsuji herself be condemned by an entity like that girl for running away without lending a helping hand? Wisely, the adult in Mitsuji avoided answering those questions and pushed them aside.
黒ヤギのことはここだけの秘密ね。でないとあなたの正体がバレるし、上役である私の責任追及も免れない。
Yeah, after all, you did let a rather dangerous character slip through your fingers with that oversight in the list.
あなたのせいでもあるでしょ?
Yeah, it was. Maybe I already knew and let her go.
もしそうなら、あなたはもっと動揺してるわよ、羊さん。生きがってるけど、本来は小心で純朴でしょ、あなた。
Shut up.
黒ヤギか。その子にも会ってみたいわね。
I'm sure you will. You're already pretty deep in this, after all. The bond between Jinxes would likely bring them together eventually.
今後ともよろしく。
Yeah. Her superior now gone, Mitsuji turned back to the PC screen. She deleted the threatening wall of text she'd written and quickly began typing the fake story she'd been ordered to type up. This kind of report didn't matter anymore. To Mitsuji, the incident had only just begun. She was sure of that. End. That's kind of interesting though. Oh, wait. P.S. 6 years later, violent and terrifying criminals known as the Black Goat Septuplets became well known in the world of superpowers. After this, the church successfully made contact with the Black Goat behind closed doors, and the power dynamics in the world of superpowers shifted even further. EPS, 4 years after that, the following conversation occurred in the corner of a provincial city. Is everything in order? Yeah, but for someone who used to be your ally, you sure did take care of them pretty easily. I don't see or feel the need to draw the line between enemies and allies at the scene of a murder. It dulls you and is more trouble than it's worth. Huh, what an annoying way to put it. In any case, I'm grateful. Thanks, though I'd say me and the others deserve the most credit. Anyway, you should go to your sister's place. I have no choice. I'll have to stay out of school for a little while. Roger, leave the printouts and notes to me. Are you okay with that? I'm asking if you're okay not going after him alongside the others. Well, we should let the two who went forward back then take lead now, don't you think? Not that any of that matters. How annoying. Oh well, it's fine. I prefer those who are more mature, composed, and craftier myself. Well, you got the last one, at least. Yeah, I guess. Just how many were tricked this time again? It sounds like you have a specific person in mind who matches that criteria. Usayuki. That's a weird name. Forget it. You're not even interested, right? Yeah. How annoying. Later then. Later. Of course, this conversation wasn't written in any of the church's records. It would be a little while after this that the Black Goat and Sheep would meet again. Okay, I was about to say they really are setting that up for like a sequel or something like that. And then the scene came, and then it's like said PS, and I was like, okay, never mind, maybe they're like ending it there, and then they set it up even more. But as far as I'm aware, like no sequel or anything of the sort has come out, and I'm not sure if they're working on anything like that. I'm gonna proceed to go and try to find out right after I'm done recording this, but it would certainly be interesting. I would be interested. They set up a huge amount of stuff and lore in that little extra story at the end there. And yeah, I would be interested to find out about what happens to Meiko, or with Meiko, in the future. I mean, what was it at that point? I think it was 11 years later, so Meiko would have been 15 years old at that point. I don't actually know who. I mean, I guess presumably one of the other children failures in quotation marks that came from the Pasture Project is who she'd been talking with in that scene. But yeah, they also mentioned about like getting rid or like eliminating or whatever, however they phrased it, like her past companions. So I don't know if like who specifically they were talking about. Maybe she murdered everyone in Fujiyoshi, who knows, except for Haruaki. But yeah, I don't know, I'm interested. I want to find out more anyway. But for now, I mean, that's it for Raging Loop. We've read through the story, we've read through all the extra side stories, or like them. I mean, I guess they were mostly continuations. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching. I certainly had a lot of fun playing the game. Some routes were more interesting than others. I did like certainly have a couple parts where I was like, okay, this is dragging on a bit. But overall, like, I read a review of the like a Steam review, so like not a proper review, but I tend to just like take a quick glance at ratings and stuff like that, and spoiler-free reviews. And there was something in there that kind of said like, okay, you're just like like you're going through the same thing over and over again. And it just really did not feel like that to me. Like, I was kind of expecting a lot of annoying, like, you're reading the same text again and again, but I feel like the game did a very good job at, not having that. Like, you just kind of, it always feels like it's different, even if you're going through some kind of similar events. So yeah, I had a fun time. I hope you did too. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again next time. Till then, bye bye.